On USA Tonight, a matter of life and death, the malpractice insurance crisis strikes home in Florida, plus these other stories. Tonight, the anticipation builds. Oliver North testifies on Capitol Hill.
No American can choose for himself or herself which laws to obey or disregard, no matter how sincere.
Also, a rehearsal for possible U.S. combat in the Persian Gulf. On the Health Beat, made in the U.S., but available only across the border.
We believe that the drug is safe and that it does limit progression from LAS to full-blown AIDS.
Tonight's interview, a presidential candidate speaks out.
I'm afraid that if Mr. Bork is part of the court, we could go back on those very important moves the court made in the middle 60s.
From the Independent News, this is USA Tonight with Morton Dean.
USA Tonight's Health Feed is brought to you by Anacin.
Marijuana and cocaine are not the only drugs being smuggled across the Mexican border. Add Ribavirin to the list. The drug, not yet approved in the U.S., reportedly slows the onset of AIDS, and a growing number of the worried well, those infected with the virus but not yet ill with it, are becoming steady customers. Andrea Kaiser reports.
During the past 2.5 years, Jim Corti has driven the 200-mile route between Los Angeles and Tijuana, Mexico, hundreds of times. Sometimes he travels alone. Other times his van is filled with AIDS victims. Corti, a registered nurse, goes to Mexico to get antiviral drugs that are not approved in the United States for the treatment of AIDS. The most popular drug across the border is Vilona, made by a California company called ICN. It is known in this country as Ribavirin. In the United States, Ribavirin is being sold to hospitals solely for the use in infant respiratory problems. But Ribavirin is not legal here as an anti-AIDS drug. However, thousands of Americans believe this experimental drug will prevent the onset of AIDS or slow down the progress of the deadly disease. So they're willing to go to Mexico and pay from $23 to $40 for a box of 12 pills.
This shows that the system is not working. If people have to go somewhere else and bring it in, but again, it's the hope that it offers people, the fact that people are able to do something for themselves. What is your price on Vilona?
Price $33.82.
$33.82? Okay, thank you very much. And what is your price for Vilona today?
$26 a box.
$26 a box? Okay, thank you very much.
Is Ribavirin or Vilona big business for drugstores like yours?
Well, it is right now.
Corti, who doesn't have AIDS, looks for the best deals on Ribavirin and then travels back to the United States with a 3-month supply for one person of the drug. That's a legal limit of experimental drugs allowed to be carried across the border. Not all of the Ribavirin coming into the United States is being declared at the border. Sources tell INN that much of the antiviral drug is being illegally transported to the U.S. over these hills. The couriers, who are known as coyotes, have taken as much as $44,000 worth of Ribavirin and dropped it off in the United States, where an underground network is distributing it throughout the country. The FDA would not talk with us about the Ribavirin situation, but the company that makes Ribavirin told us they're doing everything they can to meet the federal government's requirements for getting Ribavirin made legal.
We believe that in the doses that have been used in the clinical trials, particularly at the 800 milligram level, that the drug is safe and that it does limit progression from LAS to full-blown AIDS.
So far, only one drug, AZT, has been approved by the FDA for the treatment of AIDS. But not all AIDS patients can take AZT. For some, it is too expensive. For others, too toxic. And federal rules require the patient's blood cell count to be extremely low before they are eligible for the drug. That's why doctors are going outside of the system and recommending to their patients who can't take AZT to use Ribavirin, even if it means going to Mexico to get the drug.
It's clear that in the test tube and in small populations, this drug is efficacious. That is, it works to prevent the onset of the full-blown picture.
But despite the support of doctors and pressure by desperate AIDS patients, the federal government is asking ICN to provide more data before it considers approving this drug. So AIDS victims continue to rely on friends like Jim Corti to provide them with pills and hope from across the border. In Tijuana, this is Andrea Kaiser reporting.
USA Tonight's Health Feed was brought to you by Anacin.
The development of a new medicine is a major contribution to humanity. Indeed, Virazid has made a tremendous impact in the pharmaceutical field.
65% of the diseases of mankind are viral related. It seemed to me there was an opportunity there. But I was also interested in more than that. I was interested to see if it might be possible to devise an analog of penicillin. That is, to produce broad-spectrum antiviral agents.
The breakthrough came at ICN Pharmaceuticals in Costa Mesa, California. Dr. Roland Robbins, creator of Virazid.
You should be able to inhibit the virus from replicating and thus actually treat the viral infection instead of treating symptoms like we had been doing up until now.
From ABC, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Good evening. The National Academy of Sciences has issued a very stern warning on the subject of AIDS. The Academy defined the problem with a forecast of how many people could die in the next 5 years. In Washington, ABC's Bettina Gregory.
This panel of experts said by 1991, 179,000 Americans will have died from AIDS. 54,000 deaths will occur in 1991 alone. That's more than the number of Americans killed during the entire Vietnam War. These experts also admit the future is not too bright. The report says a vaccine to prevent AIDS is at least 5 years off. A cure could take even longer.
We have perhaps been a little overly optimistic in our public pronouncements about what we were going to have in the way of vaccines or drugs.
And while the majority of AIDS cases will continue to occur among homosexual men, this panel predicts by 1991 there'll be at least 7,000 heterosexuals who have AIDS. That's 7 times the number there are now.
Good evening. I'm Harding Carter, and this is Nightline.
AIDS, act up! Fight back! Fight AIDS!
Critics charge that the Reagan administration has been turning its back on those suffering from AIDS, and that thousands are dying while the federal bureaucracy treads water.
Really is a nightmare.
Bill, $47 million was put aside over 2 years, almost 2 years ago, by the government, given to the National Institutes of Health to test experimental drugs. In 2 years, they haven't used a penny of it.
As we reported last night in our ABC News Washington Post poll, we find that nearly 2/3 of Americans say AIDS is the nation's #1 health problem. But how close is a treatment, a real treatment, or a cure? We put that question to our medical editor, Dr. Tim Johnson.
The manufacturers of both AZT and Ribavirin have requested FDA approval. AZT studies have suggested prolonged survival in AIDS victims with serious complications. Ribavirin studies have suggested a decreased risk to actual AIDS progression in those who carry the virus. An even more immediate goal for public health officials is the treatment of AIDS virus carriers before they develop actual disease.
Doctors at Houston's Institute for Immunological Disorders today announced that an experimental drug appears to delay the onset of AIDS in some patients. The drug is called Ribavirin. In a recent study involving patients in Houston and 3 other cities, Ribavirin was found to significantly delay the development of AIDS in patients with a pre-AIDS condition called LAS.
We can't say that it prevents the disease, nor can we say that it cures the disease, but it delays the onset. And that, of course, is a very important thing, I think.
The FDA refused to allow ICN to expand its testing.
The agency has not allowed them to expand testing in humans until this proof has been developed.
Ribavirin is an antiviral drug. Shows a lot of promise in other diseases. Matter of fact, it's already approved in this country for a flu-like disease in infants. The Army is using it for Lassa fever. And the government's own Centers for Disease Control were among the first to begin testing it in AIDS. Patients who want Ribavirin have to leave the country to get it. We'll show you the latest from the front.
This is Regis Pharmacy in Tijuana, where frightened and desperate AIDS patients come if they want to buy Ribavirin. They come to Mexico because it hasn't been approved for use in the United States.
We have had some calls from people as far as New York, Canada, Kansas City, all over the United States. They're calling our drugstore to come and buy this product.
Why do people from this country have to go all the way to Mexico just to try a drug for AIDS? Well, ICN Pharmaceuticals, the company that makes Ribavirin, won't comment. They're afraid of making the Food and Drug Administration angry. But sources within the company tell me that they're angry and frustrated. They want ribavirin approved, not for sale, just approved for further testing.
Dr. Peter Hazeltine conducted early tests of ribavirin at USC. And after 3 months of intense analysis of the data, he concludes ribavirin appears to have some promise in treating some patients with early symptoms of AIDS.
We're not talking cure here. We're talking about buying some time for some people. But I do think it's in the interests of everybody that we in the scientific community rapidly evaluate this information and make some decisions about what to do next.
One of the points you want to make is that ribavirin is just one. There are drugs out there which you think show promise, and you can't even get them introduced into the ailing community.
Phil, we've been following people for 3 years who've been on that drug, for example, which is a product of a U.S. company. They go down to Mexico, they buy it. We've followed over 1,000 people we've been in touch with on this, and a large number of those people have done well because of it, and they're still around. Now, it's not a panacea. It doesn't help everybody, but the people who did that, broke out of the system, have survived.
The FDA had an understanding with the Customs Service that would allow AIDS patients or physicians treating AIDS patients to bring back what's known as a personal use quantity of ribavirin and some other drugs. We decided we'd do what we could to help facilitate patients who felt they wanted to get this particular treatment.
For the second time in 5 months, a Costa Mesa Pharmaceutical Corporation has lost its bid to get federal approval for a new AIDS drug. ICN has been working on the antiviral drug ribavirin, but the Food and Drug Administration ruled that the company hadn't demonstrated that ribavirin meets FDA safety standards. The drug is readily available in Mexico, but as for now, ribavirin remains on clinical hold, a regulatory limbo that permits no additional clinical experimentation with that drug.
A gay rights group angry with the pace of AIDS drug development has filed a class action lawsuit against the Department of Health and Human Services, the Food and Drug Administration, and the National Institutes of Health. Their suit alleges that when promising drugs to treat AIDS patients are developed, they are not all treated equally in the federal approval process. Don Torrance reports.
Randy Close is one of the plaintiffs in the suit. Infected with the AIDS virus 2 years ago, he says he had to go to Mexico to get 2 antiviral drugs that are not approved for sale in this country, ribavirin and isoprenazine.
We do know that ribavirin is not toxic. We know that its toxicity has been proven, that it's not that toxic. But the taking of these drugs really is my decision along with my doctors. And it's criminal, if not manslaughter, for them to hold these drugs back from us.
Did you know there are some who believe that a conspiracy exists in this administration, led by those who believe AIDS is a moral issue and not a public health emergency? A conspiracy to deny Americans who have AIDS proper treatment. Yes, there are those who believe such a conspiracy exists, and I am one of them. How else explain that 19,000 Americans die of AIDS before the president even mentions the word? How else explain that after 6 years, only 1 drug for treating AIDS has been approved by the FDA? 12 more drugs under study for years. 12 more drugs which could save lives, including ribavirin, made in California but for sale only in Mexico, because the federal government is dragging its feet. Faced with such unconscionable delays, there's only one thing for California to do: conduct our own drug trials at UCLA, for example, and license our own drugs for use only in California. Our way of saying, if the federal government doesn't care about stopping this ungodly plague, we do.
Elsewhere in the news, a coalition of liberal and conservative lawmakers announcing today an effort to allow California to test and license experimental AIDS drugs. Under the legislation unveiled today at the Capitol, the testing would be done by the Department of Health Services.
And by a unanimous vote, the Assembly sent a bill to the governor allowing experimental drugs to be tested on AIDS patients before the drugs are approved by the federal government.
This bill will allow thousands of desperately ill Californians the dignity and hope of participating in vitally important medical research. For some, it may literally save their lives.
KNBC TV, the Southland's most watched television station.
An Orange County firm has been given permission to use the drug ribavirin in tests on its effectiveness against some forms of AIDS. ICN Pharmaceutical of Costa Mesa has been given the go-ahead by the Food and Drug Administration. A spokesman for ICN said the FDA no longer has concern of sufficient magnitude to prevent the company from further testing. The drug will be given to AIDS patients at New York Hospital Cornell Medical Center.